I think there's a possibility to have a psychedelic experience. Is inborn. These psychedelics, very similar compounds are in our brain. And all the compounds which you find in the plant kingdom, only the psychedelics are so closely related chemically to these brain factors, which we already have. We speak about the paradise of childhood. When I have the vision and a beautiful experience as a child, it is no wonder, because we have these compounds already in our brain.
In the 1940s, Dr. Albert Hofmann discovered a substance that had a profound influence on the way science viewed the human mind. D-lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD.
I feel very indebted to Albert Hofmann for inventing LSD. After my first LSD experience, I claimed that this was the greatest discovery that man had ever made, because after all, the human mind is the most important attribute we have, and this lets us understand our mind and the enormous potential of mind. Albert told us about his youth and how he used to love to go out into the forest and feel the wonder and the beauty and the light. He actually sensed a light in the forest, and he felt exalted.
I was walking in a beautiful May morning. Suddenly, I stopped and I had the feeling everything had changed. The wood was beautiful, beautiful green, and I had the feeling that I saw now the wood as it really is. And I had the feeling I would be included by it. I had a feeling of happiness I had never had before. And this gave me the security that if you have open eyes, you may see the world in a different way. I mean, you see it as it really is. Wonderful.
(1943). War rages across Europe. In the neutral confines of Switzerland, chemist Albert Hofmann is hard at work at the Sandoz Pharmaceutical Company's Basel laboratory. While searching for a cure for migraine headaches, Hofmann accidentally ingests a minute amount of an experimental substance that would change both his life and the world, LSD-25. Many would come to view it as a spiritual antidote to the atom bomb. Before the decade is over, Sandoz has sent Hofmann's discovery to researchers and psychiatrists all over the world for testing. Research projects spring up in such places as Canada, the US, England, and Czechoslovakia.
One day we got a large box full of ampules, and it was LSD. And there was an accompanying letter that said this was a very fascinating substance, discovered practically by accident, or Dr. Hofmann, the discoverer, likes to call it serendipity rather than accident.
When I discovered LSD, it was believed it was a product of laboratory. And then we discovered that these compounds had existed already for thousands of years in the plant kingdom. Not exactly LSD, but practically.
When he intoxicated himself accidentally, he discovered that this was a very, very powerful psychoactive substance, and then he confirmed it in a planned self-experiment.
being a cautious man, I started with a very, very little amount, only with a quarter of a milligram I tested. And then I had I could say a terrible experience.
We take a long time to get used to our world when we're... well, we take many years, in fact, learning about it and learning how to behave in it. And when it changes suddenly and dramatically, we may not like this.
After some hours, when I was laying in the bed, I came back. I came back for a foreign, quite foreign existence to new life. I saw, certainly, I realized how wonderful our Earth is. I felt newborn, to be newborn, and even the next day, when I went in the garden, the world was new.
Just what is LSD and what does it do?
The effect is somewhat like looking through a microscope. Suddenly, when you look through a microscope, you discover that there's an invisible world around you that you hadn't known about before you did it. The same thing is true with a psychedelic drug. You're aware of processes that are going on inside your own brain. You're aware of the exchange of energies that are going on between your sense organs and the energies around them that you weren't aware of before.
Generally, you have no hallucinations with LSD. Hallucination is if you see something which does not exist. Just. But under LSD, you see things which are transformed, and comes. It is a different view, a different experience of our existence.
The very fact your senses change means that you're faced with a lot of new and quite unfamiliar problems. I mean, you suddenly become aware of the textures and colours. All these things suddenly become immensely important.
For myself, these experiences have been most strange, most awesome, and in their own way, amongst the most beautiful in my life. A sense of special significance began to invest everything. Everything was brilliantly sharp and significant. If I fixed my attention on a flower, I felt that I could spend all day in contemplating it. Phrases such as, "I've seen with the eye of the world," "the eye of the newborn and the new dead," sprang to my tongue, apparently without construction. A plain wooden chair was invested with a chairiness no chair had ever for me before.
One begins to see significance in things that you didn't see before. Many people become aware of a quite different world. Saskatchewan is a very large place, and a lot of it's empty. I spent many years in Saskatchewan, which I'm in an ambivalent way very fond. I went there as clinical director of this large mental hospital. I enjoyed the distant days in Saskatchewan.
New chemicals allow us to experience some of the unbelievably unpleasant and sometimes quite terrifying mental agonies of the schizophrenic patient. To some extent, to put ourselves in his shoes for a few hours. These people have terrible experiences. That's why they're so tense. We know that seemingly small errors made in caring for them will cause that tension to rise.
It was a bad hospital. Every time you went there, you were surrounded by people who were yelling and shouting and gesticulating and making all sorts of noise. And they were very sick, unhappy people. On the grounds at night, there was always shrieking and crying and screaming. You could hear it all over the place. Terrible place. It really was.
We found ourselves landed with this decrepit hospital and a demoralized staff. As it turned out, they were a lot better than many people believed. They were decent and humane prairie people, and they did a very good job.
Dr. Abraham Hoffer, biochemist and psychiatrist, heads our research team at the University Hospital in Saskatoon.
Abe and I met because of my interest, what became his interest in schizophrenia. He was an admirable chap to work with. He's a prairie born, and the other very important point was a lot of things that he was tremendously helpful to me, because my old predecessor would say, he said, you don't understand the Canadians of the prairies. And having got Abe as a reference point, I was able to prove many astounding refutations of this. And you could produce them on the hoof, as it were.
I've always given Humphrey credit for the immense contribution he made. He was the single most important catalyst. Had he not come to Saskatchewan when he did, I doubt I would have gone into this field at all. And my guess is that I would have become a straightforward, standard, conservative, orthodox psychiatrist.
We are able to hold our world constant. For the schizophrenic person, this constancy breaks down, or begins to break down, which is worse because of the uncertainty. We've conducted hundreds of experiments using different substances to produce schizophrenic-like symptoms in ourselves. I put myself through more than 15 experiments using everything from ololuqui to adrenolutin.
Once we began getting a little more money, we didn't get much more money, but a little more money, and the conditions really improved quite a lot.
Tommy Douglas, he was a man of tremendous vision. It made sense to him to say that schizophrenia keeps a lot of people tied up for years and years, and nobody knows what causes it, and nobody knows how to cure it, and maybe there's a better way to go about it. And so they set up a project, and I was caught in the project. It was great.
So we had everything going for us at that time. It was a series of coincidences that probably could not happen again.
By the mid-1950s, LSD research was being published in medical and academic journals all over the world. It showed potential benefits in the treatment of alcoholism, drug addiction, and other mental illnesses. Some psychiatrists and other mental health workers began taking it themselves in order to experience greater empathy with their schizophrenic patients. Much of this work was pioneered by Osmond, Hoffer, and Blewett in Saskatchewan, where the prevailing psychoanalytic model of mental illness was about to give way to one based on brain chemistry.
Dr. Humphrey Osmond, it was him that first said that when you're working with LSD, you have to start with yourself. And you should, to put yourself forward as knowing something about LSD until you'd taken it was almost criminal. And he sort of laid down the ground rules of research with LSD in the province, and they were very sound. This is compared to the research that was carried out in other centers. This Saskatchewan was miles ahead of the pack.
In Saskatchewan, and cooperating with scientists all over the world, we've been working to prove a theory we think is sound.
We decided to use these drugs to see if we could get inside the skin of a schizophrenic patient. to see if this might give us a clue as to how we might better treat them.
I was simply interested in seeing what this was the experience our patients had, what it was like. And it was a great surprise to me.
LSD really changed our thinking. And it had the following major changes, that once we had taken the LSD, we became much more aware of what was happening to the schizophrenic patient.
And it also had the effect of taking the patient's accounts of their experience very seriously, which you don't necessarily do if you hear them every day and they're always much the same. You don't really think about what's it like for that particular person.
Dr. Hoffer, you've used it in treating alcoholism. Why do you use it for that purpose?
In my opinion, Mr. Burton, and this is based upon 500 cases that we have treated over the past 8 years, we selected alcoholics because it is often easier to know whether they are improved or not. And many of our people had not responded to the best treatment that we could give them, and they are now sober and good people. We began to use LSD to treat alcoholics. The original idea was to use it as a drug. Give them LSD, give them a terrible time, and hope that they would therefore not want to drink anymore. It didn't work that way at all.
Alcoholics tended to be very tolerant of their own shortcomings, and they rather liked not to think about this. The great advantage with one of the hallucinogens is that you could make them very well aware of this, and it might alter, sometimes change their behavior. They might see it in a quite different light.
They gave the first LSD to the alcoholics, and after they had given it to 5 or 6 or 7, Humphrey says, you know, he said, it's not working. I said, what do you mean? He says, we can't give them this terrible time they're supposed to have. I said, what's happening? He said, it's something different. And he began to describe what was happening. He was describing a psychedelic experience.
Under LSD, some of them sometimes would get the idea that perhaps they really were mistreating their own kin. And that is a powerful incentive to do something about it. It's not thought to be a good idea to persecute your own family unless the family liked it. And presumably, if they took a dim view of your drinking, they didn't like it.
These experiments have helped us to experience something of how these ill people perceive the world, its dimensions of time, space, and color.
Humphrey gave me LSD, and I learned the secret of his success. It's all on the inside. It's just looking for you.
If you don't really understand the spiritual basis of man and you're not open to it, you're missing one of the greatest contributions that LSD can make. Well, Hubbard came along and demonstrated a whole new way of using it based on spiritual realization.
Captain Alfred M. Hubbard was born into a poor Kentucky family in 1902. Eccentric and charismatic, he grew up to make his fortune as a pilot, an inventor, and an entrepreneur. After some of his darker dealings got him into trouble with U.S. authorities during World War II, he moved to an island off the coast of British Columbia. Hubbard believed that if the right individuals were exposed to it, LSD could save the world. he set about on his mission to turn on the captains of industry and the princes of the church.
In a good LSD experience, what happens that as you resolve your inner conflicts and the loads and the barriers that have developed, and you begin to reach down into the depths of your own being, you see more and more levels of being, more and more levels of understanding. Often we like to blame our feelings on other people and what they're doing to us. But if I feel it, it's my feeling, and I have produced it, and I'm the only one that can resolve it. And fortunately, these substances allow you to see and recognize this and resolve it. Meeting Hubbard was one of the most remarkable things that ever happened to me. Maybe not as effective as taking LSD, but he was so different than anyone I'd ever met. But the thing about him that was also very different was he radiated an energy that I could feel. I don't think ever before in my life I'd ever felt anyone, but I could feel his energy, and I just felt so good in his presence.
He had a religious vision that he was working on behalf of the Virgin Mother and giving people the key to the religious universe, you know. And he only half believed it himself. But he was the most unlikely man to be on a religious mission that you could possibly imagine.
He has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. He gave me a little methadone, which is a nice euphoria. So it left me with very good feelings about Al Hubbard, and I was pretty convinced that I needed to go and try LSD with him. So I made a date and went up to Canada. I was just astounded at what I learned, and I felt enormously free from the way I had before. And then I just couldn't get over such a profound learning experience. So naturally, I became very enthused about it. I started talking to people about it and encouraging others, and began to wonder how I could get more and more involved. We set up the foundation in Menlo Park, and we had got a lot of help from Al. We formed a corporation. Hoffer and Osmond were on the board of directors.
Al was not interested in extremely objective evidence. He was interested in the evidence he liked, which is very human and understandable.
He lacked any sort of credence because he didn't have the customary training. And people just sort of poo-pooed him as a wild man, but he was some wild man.
I only met him once. It was very amusing. He came for lunch, a very busy man, and he came with some apparatus. The apparatus was to give himself some CO2, I think. And after lunch, he took his dosage of CO2, and then he was happy, and then he left. That's the only time I met him. Very extraordinary type. Aldous would be fascinated by a person like that. Oh, yes.
Whether one makes contact with Aldous Huxley through his writing or in personal conversation, the impression that comes almost immediately is that of a uniquely versatile, omnivorous intellect, constantly searching and probing with a clean, cold incisiveness.
Aldous saw an article that I'd written somewhere, and through that I got to know him. He was a very nice person to me. First, at his best, an excellent conversationalist, and immensely learned, and very good-natured. And of course, he was practically no subject. He didn't know a lot more about it than I did, so I was very impressed by this.
The start of the Second World War found eminent British author Aldous Huxley writing screenplays in Hollywood, California. While there, Huxley explored Eastern mysticism with such luminaries as Gerald Heard and Alan Watts. He wrote to Dr. Humphrey Osmond after reading an article about mescaline that the doctor had published. They struck up a friendship that would last until Huxley's death in 1963. But it was during their first meeting in 1953 that Osmond gave Huxley his first psychedelic experience, which prompted the author to compose his famous essay, The Doors of Perception.
I didn't really want to end my career as the man who'd driven Aldous mad. It wouldn't have been a good start. But in fact, we had a very pleasant time together. And also, I don't think I made any very great blunders, so that Aldous liked the experience. It interested him, and I think he liked to think that this was contributed something to scientific knowledge too.
The point that interests me is that whereas the ordinary everyday experience is of course absolutely essential most of the time, it's not the only possible experience. There are also other types of consciousness, I mean the artist type, the mystics type and so on, which have empirically an enormous value and may help people to live less self-centered and more charitable lives and more understanding lives.
Aldous and I would give this session to a friend or to someone who wanted, and the preparation for session was very, very careful. The day before, we didn't do anything. We just fixed the house very quietly. The day of the session, there was nothing except that, and even the day after. So there was a 3-day thing because, as Aldous wrote in Ireland, the session is a gratuitous grace. It's what you take away from there, a gratuitous grace. Something's given to you for nothing. Not that you merit it. You just are lucky and get it. But what you do with it afterwards is what counts.
Nothing is easier than to formulate high ideals, but few things are more difficult than to discover the means whereby those ideals may be implemented. One has to dream, but one has to dream in a pragmatic way.
I think Huxley enjoyed Hubbard. Hubbard was very excited about the potential of LSD. He felt a mission to the world to bring this and have it spread. One of the things that the two of us planned was to hopefully reach the place where we could set up treatment centers around the world. Eventually, Al set up a place in Vancouver, which was a place to give people LSD with a proper kind of setting to make people feel at home and encourage them. When the person was accepted to go through the program, he was given an outline to write his history, what problems he had, if he had any health problems, what was the relationship with his parents, what was his childhood like. So then they came to the session and some introductory remarks were made. The importance, for example, of just releasing to the experience and knowing that they had help and could ask questions. And then they were administered LSD. And then we would lie them down on the couch. We'd put headphones on them and encourage an internal journey. And then we would put on music. And we would keep playing the music. And usually it's been the first 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours there. And that's what we wanted, for them to go deeply into themselves and explore. Of course, we were taking notes, and we had a tape recorder so that everything that was said was recorded.
Can I come up for a minute? Certainly, David.
So then after 4, maybe 5 hours, they would feel like coming out and sitting up, so we began to talk.
That was magnificent.
We would show them pictures of the family so that they could look at them and spend time with them, which is probably the most important part of the session for people who were there for therapeutic reasons. Hubbard was very ingenious at working out things that promoted the effectiveness of the LSD experience. One of them he came up with was the strobe, and he found that if the strobe light, if you get it pretty close to the alpha rhythm, produced a very weird effects. It does anyway as a natural strobe. When you combine that with LSD, it's really very remarkable. Looking into the mirror is one of the most powerful things you can do, to look at yourself. And of course, at first, some people really draw back, you know. I've seen people even frightened at the image of their mirror, but we encourage them, just look, just accept it. And as they do, they begin to see more and more. And if they go far enough with this, they begin to see their inner self. One of the most powerful artifacts that you can show to a person when they're under the influence is a beautiful red rose that just partly open. It hasn't fully opened yet. For many, the rose comes to life, and they actually see it breathe. They can actually see the petals open and close. We would always have arranged for a sitter to take them home, and the sitter would take them home and sit with them until they went to sleep. People had a sense of being dropped. They came for a few times afterwards, and then we didn't see them anymore, and we'd paid such close attention to them ahead of time that they felt sort of neglected. There were several people who'd gone through the process who were sort of typical leader types, and they formed groups so that people could join one of the groups, and they would go to the group, say, once a week, and they'd share experiences with each other.
My feeling was in this that if you're sort of looking for paradise after this experience, you begin to realize that it's right here, wherever you happen to be, like where we're sitting.
You make your own heaven and hell.
It's very important that one is prepared for the use of psychedelics. It is not just fun, it is a very serious experiment.
Psychedelics allow you to do things, but you only do the things that you really want to do. And if it's something that you don't want to do, then stay away from it. It's not for you. So intention is the bottom line. As a matter of fact, I think intention is the bottom line in life anyway, for all of us at any time.
When you think about ritual, traditional ritual ceremony, that's just the purpose of intentional use of arranging the set and the setting. It's not that ritual per se has any value, but it has value depending on the intention and the set and the setting that's behind it.
Set is what you bring to the experience. You bring your life experience, you bring your memories, you bring your unconscious material, you bring your aspirations. Some people may have a much better set and sail very smoothly through these experiences. Others may have very difficult sets and may have to work harder and maybe be a lot more uncomfortable before they get things resolved. Setting is also important, and setting is the place where you have the experience. It's your surroundings, it's your companions, and these things are very important.
The approach to give an LSD session was extraordinarily thought out, careful, respectful, loving, and it's also self-effacing. Because the most difficult thing if you are a guide is not to have opinion, to let the person give whatever he feels, whatever he sees. And so it was completely different from what happened 4 years later, where that was given in the street, and it was very upsetting.
When young people started using it, they'd go to a party or something and they get stoned out of their gourd, and then there was no support system if they freaked out. And they'd end up in a mental ward somewhere and get a shot of niacin or something to pull them down. And that wasn't very effective way of getting them to consider what they were learning.
If the setting is threatening and frightening, or if the people involved suddenly shove off in the middle of it, the person may get very frightened. And then you've got anxiety, which is no longer controlled by the normal means of controlling anxiety. It just goes on, and they may panic. And that, of course, has happened.
There were places in Canada where they tied people in bed to give them LSD. And I don't know why they would do that, but partly that came about because the early research with it was done by the American Army, and their aim was altogether different. They wanted to use it as a weapon. And when you start from the weapons approach, it's the confusion and the disturbance that you're capitalizing on, because they felt that if you give it to a whole population, they'd be pretty well immobilized because people wouldn't be able to carry on in their normal fashion, and you just sort of move them out of the road quietly and move in and take over their function, and you have a victory with no trouble whatever. That was the theory, but it backfired on the Americans. They found out that when they gave it to the soldiers, the first thing the soldiers wanted to do was quit the army.
We teach the science and art of ecstasy. We teach people how to turn on or how to go out of their minds. By turn on, we mean to tune in, to get beyond your routine ways of thinking and acting and experiencing.
In 1961, two of Harvard University's best and brightest minds discovered psilocybin and LSD. Richard Alpert, who later changed his name to Ram Dass, and Timothy Leary, along with graduate student Ralph Metzner, began doing psychedelic research on a wide scale, conducting projects with religious leaders and prison communities, among others. Harvard's administration eventually grew uncomfortable with the amount of media attention Leary was receiving and canceled the project. Leary, Alpert, and Metzner moved first to Mexico and then to upstate New York to continue working with these substances.
We were like middle-class academics, and our role, I think, in retrospect, was to try to find some way that the professional middle-class world of psychologists, psychotherapists, and so forth could accommodate these experiences. And we tried it within the university setting, and it worked for a while, and certain experiments were done, and we carried out the experiments, and we published articles in the journal, and then after a while it was no longer possible to do that there. Then we experimented with other settings. We had this LSD training center in Zihuatanejo in Mexico, where we said, well, let's go into a, where we're freed from the usual constraints, but we still have the structure. We just want to explore these potentials of these in a serious way. It was not just an ongoing drug party, and it was planned. It was attention paid to certain settings and so forth. But then that also proved to be not viable. We didn't have the right political support. It's just a tendency for these substances to become sensationalized.
We often say that we're teaching people how to use their head. The point is that in order to use your head, you have to go out of your mind. You have to go out of all of the static, symbolic ways in which you think, experience.
Tim Leary, from my perspective, sort of created more problems. I don't think it was he certainly popularized LSD, and, incited a lot of people to experiment, but he did not really give fair information. He was talking about LSD, as a substance that makes trillions of your cells singing the song of liberation. Didn't tell people about the dangers, that before you go to heaven, you might go to hell. Or if you don't do it right, you might stay there.
Mainly, Timothy was a really brilliant entrepreneur of notions. And on that, he was at his best, very good. Unfortunately, he didn't necessarily always get very good notions.
I have much more respect myself for Ramdas. They were, colleagues, professors at Harvard, but the direction he took towards the spiritual philosophies in India and his sort of following was his, really very serious spiritual practice.
I was more using psychedelics to clean myself out. Tim was using it more to clean the society out.
I wasn't born Richard Alpert. I was just born as a human being. And then I learned this whole business of who I am and whether I'm good or bad or achieving or not. All that's learned along the way. And you see all those learned things separate. So you start to have this dissociative experience of where all that you become is awareness, is a point of awareness. That's all that's left. I remember the first time this happened to me, as professor went and middle-class boy went and pilot went and all of my games were like going off into the distance. I got this terrible panic because indeed I was going to cease to exist. And I got the panic, which is the panic that precedes the psychological death, because indeed Richard Alpert was dying.
The psychedelics opened my mind to whole new spaces of myself and the universe. I remember thinking at the psychedelic session, the with mushrooms. What I'm experiencing now is home. It's a side of me that I never experienced through psychology. It's like a new level of my being. And I got so excited.
We think of ourselves as members of a very traditional organization of men who have been asking the question, what's what, and who is man, and what is this energy process all about?
Larry didn't think the institutions could possibly work. They're too encrusted. They were not open-minded. So therefore, he had to carry out this plan that they had engineered. And I said, I don't think you can change except through our institutions. So he said, all right. He says, I'll shake them up, but you stick with the institutions and see if you can get it accepted in that way.
I think we have to see that the people who have broken out of their culture, the seers and the prophets, are essentially right, and that unless we follow their advice and follow it awfully quickly, we're going to be making an appalling havoc and mess of our world.
Aldous was, telling us to keep psychedelics quiet. And Timothy, he was like a wild adolescent.
Aldous certainly felt that it should be reserved for people who want to do it, since it's rather arduous at times. And Timothy, I think, his sort of populist approach was much on the fact that it was what he wanted to do.
What he did was he put his head down and he charged the American Medical Association head on. Bang! And the American Medical Association is more powerful than Timothy Leary, and they hounded him till his grave. But he had more effect than they did.
His role was to popularize it. And at the end, it became impossible for those of us in research to use it, but it became easy for anyone else on the street to use it. That's what Larry did.
By the mid-1960s, LSD was a household word. It became synonymous with the counterculture and was blamed for the unrest caused by the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the ecology movement, and the rising tide of protest against the war in Vietnam. The USA banned LSD and pressured other countries to do the same. This has resulted in a situation in which LSD continues to be available on the black market, while legitimate researchers are forbidden to experiment with the substance.
The supposed ban didn't work. LSD, or rather similar substances, are spread wide over the world, and people are very ingenious. I mean, they discover how to find out how to make things like this. Some of them, what they make, are dangerous and unpleasant, but that doesn't really worry the inventors very much.
I have tremendous respect for psychedelics as a tool. I have seen what they have done on the positive side. I also know the risk. I know what they can do if they are not properly used. And the more powerful the tool, the more powerful potential on both sides. There are many, many ways of inducing these experiences other than substances. Although there are shamans who use psychedelic plants, and many shamans just use non-drug methods like fasting, dehydration, sleep deprivation, or the Native Americans going on a vision quest in the mountains. Some cultures use even extreme pain, physical pain. Then, of course, dancing, chanting. There's certain specific musical instruments like drumming, rattles, bells and so on. And of course the different spiritual practices. And now we have powerful experiential psychotherapies, the rebirthing, primal therapy, the breath work, they all can induce these non-ordinary states.
Why is it that Native Americans are able to use peyote legally, and yet the larger white culture is unable to was unable to develop a format, was unable to develop in religion, in psychiatry or medicine, or even or recreationally or in any other way? When you look at the peyote experience, it's a church, it's a religion, it's also healing. It helps them with actual medicine, and for example, in treatment of alcoholism. It's also psychotherapeutic. It's an integrated experience.
The real legitimate use is spiritual practice. If you really look carefully at what these substances are, that is really the place where they should be developed. It should not be in the hands of doctors. The doctors don't really understand. Some of them may think that it will work out well for therapy, but I think there are far more psychiatrists threatened by it than there are those who recognize it as a valuable tool.
I suspect the best thing we can do would be to ritualize this.
We should have a kind of meditation centers where there would be the right conditions, the right dosages, all these factors which must be known are fulfilled.
We do want to expand our consciousness. We alter our consciousness all the time. We cycle through waking and dreaming and sleeping. It's natural. Consciousness naturally varies. I mean, I took a consciousness expanding drug this morning. I had a cup of coffee. That was a psychoactive. That got my brain going. Probably most people do that. We interact with psychoactive substances and plants all the time. And the point is to do it in a conscious way, in a discriminating way, in a purposive way, to choose it.
LSD, it's got me to see my stroke in a different way. And I can be happy with my life. And people, oh my goodness, getting happy about a stroke, that's LSD.
There are still people who are violently opposed to psychedelics. Very few of them have ever tried psychedelics. And 99% of the opposition to them comes from people who are completely ignorant of their effects. But whether it'll change remarkably in the next while, it's hard to say.
Some things take years and years and years as they finally find the right solution. And I am convinced LSD will find the place it needs in the human culture.
To fall in hell or so angelic you'll need a pinch of psychedelic. At least that's how I recall it, and I'm not sure it was necessarily that, but that was certainly the gist of it. To fall in hell or so angelic, you'll need a pinch of psychedelic.
Ritualize this.
We're not saying that you have to do it. But why can't somebody who wants to?
Ritualize
You'll need a pinch of psychedelic. At least that's how I recall it.
Why can't somebody who wants to?
You see it as it really is. Wonderful.
That's certainly the gist of it.